Today is our Barrier Island field trip. Barrier Islands are long, narrow islands that run parallel to the mainland and protect it from storms and erosion. We are traveling to Perdido Key, which is a barrier island that straddles the Alabama-Florida border. To the south of Perdido Key lies the Gulf of Mexico, and to the north lies an estuary called Old River. Perdido Key is a relatively pristine barrier island because much of it is protected from development. On the Alabama side, there is Gulf State Park. On the Florida side, there is the Gulf Islands National Seashore and Perdido Key State Park, which is where we are headed. We think of barrier islands as a permanent part of the Gulf Coast, but geologically speaking, they are quite young, less than 11,000 years old. Most scientists believe that barrier islands originated when a ridge of sand along the coastline was flooded as sea levels rose after the last ice age. This flooding created a shallow lagoon behind the ridge, thus forming a barrier island. Once formed, barrier islands are constantly changing. Overwash from storms carries sand to the backside of the island, causing the island to roll over and move towards the mainland. This means that Perdido Key is actually moving towards the north. Locally, our barrier islands also move towards the west. This is due to something called longshore drift. Waves hitting along the shoreline at an angle move sand from one end of the island to the other, causing the island to slowly migrate westward in relation to the mainland. This means that Perdido Key is slowly moving further into Alabama. Up ahead is Perdido Key Fire Station and the Chamber of Commerce. That's where we're going to park. And here we are. Before we enter the park, which is just across the street, I do want to show you something here at the edge of the parking lot. So if you want to get out and follow me. Just walk this way. I want to tell you just a little bit about the zonation which exists on a barrier island like Perdido Key before we walk across the street into the park. Barrier islands can be divided into a number of distinctive zones. The beach on the Gulf side, where we all love to go, is called the Ocean Beach. Behind it is an unvegetated area called the Berm, and a vegetated area called the Foredune. The first true dunes are behind it and are called the Primary Dune Ridge. This is where sea oats are found. Behind these lies a low-lying area called a swale. Today, the swale's been paved over with the road that we came in on. On the other side of the road is a secondary dune ridge. If you could see the island from the air, you would see that the secondary dune ridge is not a single ridge, but instead a complex topography consisting of many large dunes scattered across the middle portion of the island. These dunes are larger than the primary dunes and are separated from each other by small swales and occasional patches of freshwater marsh. Behind the dunes is an area of trees called the Maritime Forest. If you were to walk through this area, you would find it populated by trees such as sand pines and live oaks, as well as many large bushes like the southern wax myrtle. On the back side of the island is a salt marsh with tidal creeks that connect to the lagoon called Old River. So I want to walk you over here for just a second. I told you that we paved over the swale between the primary and secondary dunes, but there's a little bit of swale left right over here, and a few plants I want to show you. This is camphor weed, Heterotheca subaxillus. If you crush the leaves, it smells like camphor. This is coastal panic grass, Panicum amicum, and next to it, greenbrier, genus Smilax. It's got a lot of thorns on it, so you have to be very cautious around this plant. And you can see this is really the beginnings of secondary dune right here. And as you look off, you can see the secondary dune ridge, and off in the distance, you can see the maritime forest. Grab your gear and let's go. All right, if you would follow me this direction, we're going to walk across into the state park. Take a left up here on the sidewalk. There's a flower up here I want to show you. These are black-eyed Susans, Rudbeckia hirta. They do grow native here along the Gulf Coast, but pretty sure somebody planted these. All right, as we cross the road here, I'm going to push the little crossing thing, but please look both ways, be careful as we're crossing. People really speed through here. Now up here you're going to see is a sign that says that we need to pay a fee. There's an honor system here. We don't have to pay the fee because we're here with the school field trip. But if you come here by yourself, you definitely need to pay the fee. All right, so where the road was, that used to be the swale. Now we're coming up onto the back side of the primary dune ridge. You can see there's a lot of trees and shrubs on the back side of the dune, including this little shrub, which is pretty common. It's called beach rosemary, Ceratiola ericoides. It's similar to the rosemary that we cook with. These over here are lichens. This is a symbiotic relationship between fungus and algae. On the other side over here, I want to show you something. This might surprise you. This is a cactus. This is the prickly pear cactus, genus Opuntia. Very dry conditions out here, conducive to cactus growth. These are sand live oaks, Quercus virginiana, but they're a variety that's found out here at the Barrier Islands, slightly different than what we find on the mainland. You'll notice they grow kind of in a stunted fashion because of the lack of water, and their leaves are, it looks like somebody sculpted them with a hedge trimmer. The reason for that is the blowing sand and salt continually nips off the new growth and gives them that sculpted appearance. All right, we're coming up to the top of the dune ridge, and you can see a transition that takes place here between mostly shrubs and trees to mostly grasses. This is due to a change in the physical conditions here. This is more influenced by the ocean on this side. Let's look back. You can see the transition there between trees and shrubs and the grasses. There's a yellow flag flying today. Now it's time that we talk about the plant community on the front side of the primary dune ridge. If you look behind me, you'll see a variety of different types of grasses make up this community. But there's one species that's super important, and that is sea oats, Uniola paniculata. Sea oats play a very important role in the dune community. They actually build and stabilize dune structure. How do they do it? It's their elaborate root structure. They're able to hold on to sand grains, and over a period of about 7 years, they can take a flat section of beach and turn it into a pretty substantial dune. So this is the reason why we protect them under state law. You may have noticed signs along the beach that say $100 fine for picking sea oats. Why? Because by maintaining healthy sea oat community, we actually help maintain the primary dune ridge and therefore protect all of the houses, condos, and hotels that are found behind it. They're protected from storm surge, hurricanes, flooding, and all kinds of bad weather events. Nobody wants the Gulf of Mexico in their front yard, and that's what the primary dune ridge does. It sort of protects them from storms. So that's why we need to protect sea oats. Well, even as substantial as sea oats' role is, and maintaining the primary dune ridge, they couldn't do it by themselves. They actually have another species that helps them, and that's the beach mouse. All the barrier islands along the North Gulf Coast have beach mice. They all belong to the same species, Paramyscus polynotus. But each individual barrier island has their own subspecies. Here at Perdido Key, it's the Perdido Key beach mouse, subspecies Tricelepsis. I brought you to this section of beach to talk to you about sea oats for one particular reason. When I'm done talking, if you'll come up to the rail and look over the rail down at the dune surface, you're going to see a hole. All right, and next to that hole, if you look carefully, you'll see some footprints. Those are footprints from the Perdido Key beach mouse. And you're not going to see the beach mouse itself today. They're nocturnal, so you'd have to be out here at night with an infrared camera and be very lucky to catch them on film. However, you can see the presence of them by the footprints that they left behind. Now, why are they important to maintaining dune structure? How do they assist sea oats? Well, actually, they eat the seeds of sea oats, and so they gather enough of them to fill their belly. But when they do, they don't stop there. They continue to go ahead and gather seeds. They take the extras and they bury them in a hole somewhere, and hopefully come back to it later and eat it. But they don't always get around to doing that, and so sometimes those seeds germinate and begin to grow into more sea oats. And so by their activities, they actually help promote continued growth of sea oats and continue to stabilize and maintain the dune structure. So the sea oats work together with the beach mouse in order to build good, healthy dunes. And that's why we protect those also. The Perdido Key beach mouse is protected by both the Endangered Species Act federally and the Florida Endangered Species Act as well. Well, there's one other species I want to point out while we're here. If you look behind me, I think you'll be able to see some little white flowers off in the distance. Those white flowers belong to a species that's very aesthetically pleasing. It's the fiddle-leaf morning glory. They have beautiful white flowers. It's actually a vine that intertwines itself among a lot of the vegetation here. It belongs to the scientific name Ipomoa stolonifera. All right, and this vine is not only beautiful, but together with the other plants and sea oats, it helps to maintain the dune structure to a lesser degree, but definitely aids in that process. So that's a few of the important species that are found here along the front side of the primary dune ridge. We're going to go on down now, down the boardwalk to the beach, and there I'm going to point out some species to you that are really salt-tolerant species and the important role that they play there. Okay, let's go on down there. So there's a sign up here on the left. You can take a look at it and read it later if you want, but it was put up by the Park Service. It's just a reminder that we have to share the beach with the wildlife that live here, whether that be turtles or birds or whatever. We're going to take a left up here and then go look at an area called the Foredune. This is an area right in front of the dune, but it gets overwashed with seawater sometimes, so a lot of plants can't live here. Those that can are called halophytes, or salt-tolerant plants, and there's two species that predominate here. Here's one right here. This is the American sea rocket, Cacile edentula. And over here is another one. You can see it, the round leaves. That's dollarweed, Hydrocotyle bonarensis. Both of these are very salt-tolerant plants. I want to point out this area with all the debris. This is an area called the Strand Line. It's the highest point in the intertidal zone where the most recent high tide has been. It strands a bunch of debris there. So I know you guys are hot and sweaty from our hike across the dunes, and the ocean looks pretty inviting right now. So why don't you go ahead and take a break for about 5 minutes or so. Go ahead and get wet, get cooled off, and then come back up here and we're going to do our water quality testing. Okay? So take a short break. All right, now that you've had a break and cooled off, we need to do our water quality sampling. So we went through this before on a previous field trip. You've seen how to do all these different tests. So we're just going to divide these up. So each of you just pick a different water quality test that you'd like to work on and go ahead and start working on that test. And then we'll gather our data all together afterwards and record it on our data sheets. And you don't have to worry about tidal stage or the GPS coordinates because I'm going to take care of those. But you guys do all the rest of it, and we'll get back together here in a few minutes. Okay? So go ahead and start working on your water quality sampling, and I'll be available if you run into troubles or need help. Okay? All right, let's go. All right, well, it looks like you guys are wrapping up your data collection for the water quality data. So let's go ahead and get our sheets out and talk a little bit about the water quality data. So in filling your sheet in, of course, you know the location is Perdido Key State Park. I got the GPS unit out and found our coordinates. So if you want to write these down, the longitude is west 87 degrees, 28.130 minutes, and north 30 degrees, 17.387 minutes. So once more, that's west 87 degrees, 28.130 minutes, and north 30 degrees, 17.387 minutes. I think you can figure out the date and time. I saw y'all working on the estimated cloud cover, so that's taken care of. The tidal stage, the tide is coming in right now, and high tide is going to be tonight around 7 p.m. Visibility we are skipping today. To do visibility right, you need a secchi disc and a place to lower it off of, and it's kind of hard unless you have a boat out here, so we're not going to be able to do water visibility, but it's pretty good today, pretty clear. So I saw you guys working on dissolved oxygen, temperature, pH, salinity, dissolved carbon dioxide, Borel-Ule, is challenging. Depth of the reducing layer, I saw some folks working on that. Sediment composition, going to be mostly sand out here. Fecal coliform test, I saw somebody collecting that sample, so it's going to take us 24 hours to get the results on that, of course. So that's the water quality data. So the next thing that we're going to do, normally we would like to go on and do some seining now on the field trip, but there's a place I want to take you. All right, so before we do our seining and dip net collecting, I want you to walk down the beach a little ways with me. It's a little bit of a walk, but just down the beach there is a sea turtle nest. And we won't see any sea turtles, but I want to walk down there and talk to you a little bit about sea turtles and the nesting process here at Perdido Key. So let's head on down to the west a little bit, and I'll show you that nest. Okay? So the area that's roped off behind me with the police tape, that's a sea turtle nest. What kind of sea turtle is it? Can't tell you precisely. The odds are it's probably a loggerhead sea turtle nest. That's Caretta, is the loggerhead sea turtle. But it's very difficult to say for sure unless you were here when the nest was created. When it comes to sea turtles in the northern Gulf of Mexico, the most common species we have up here laying nests on the beaches is the loggerhead sea turtle. But occasionally we also get a green sea turtle. Sometimes we get a leatherback sea turtle, and occasionally we also get some of the Kemp's Ridley's sea turtles. But about 98% probably of what we see around here is going to be loggerhead turtles. So when it comes to sea turtles, they don't actually, the males don't ever come up on the beach. It's only the females, and the reason they come up on the beach is to lay their eggs. And this usually takes place at nighttime for most sea turtles, especially the loggerhead and the green and the leatherback would all be coming up at night. Kemp's Ridley's will actually nest during the daytime sometimes, so that's an oddity with regard to those. Generally, the female comes up on the beach. It's quite an effort for her to get up there, and she digs a hole above the high tide line using her hind flippers, and she lays her eggs, somewhere between 80 and 120 or 130 eggs. They're not like chicken eggs. They don't have a hard shell. They're kind of leathery shells. And then when she's finished laying those eggs, she fills that in with sand, once again using her hind flippers, and then she tosses some sand around the surface. If you ever dug a hole, you know that when you fill it in, you can actually see the outline of where it was dug sometimes. So she scatters some sand around a little bit to make it more difficult to see where the outline is. Then she turns around and heads back to the ocean. And she probably won't come back up on the beach and lay eggs again for several years. Over the course of a lifetime, a typical female sea turtle will lay between 1,000 and 10,000 eggs. But of those, maybe 10 will make it to adulthood. So the odds are not very good. Some of that is just natural odds, predators eating the babies. Other times it's human interactions and things that we've done that are making it more difficult for them. Here at Perdido Key, if this is a loggerhead nest, those babies would try to hatch out at nighttime and then make their way down to the ocean. In an area where there's no humans, typically the lightest area on the beach is going to be the moonlight shining off the surf. The area behind them, further up onto the barrier island, usually would be dark. Now that's not the case when humans are involved. We got houses, condos, hotels, restaurants, all of which with electric lights. And if people don't turn those off at night, which they're supposed to, there's a sea turtle ordinance. All right, but if they leave their lights on, it confuses the little babies when they come out of their nest. They don't have built-in GPS necessarily, so they're looking for that lighter area to represent the ocean. And if it's lighter behind them, going back onto the island, then they'll head that direction. They'll go to a parking lot or to a roadway or something like that, where they could get run over or get eaten by a cat or dog or something. So we want them to turn around and go the other direction, towards the water. And that's why we've implemented some of these regulations about turning your lights off for sea turtles during nesting season. When is nesting season around here? It's usually somewhere between July and the end of September. All right, so but most of those are laid during the early summer, and they're going to take about 60 days or so in order to complete their development, and the babies will hatch out, and then they'll dig through the sand up to the surface and emerge usually in the middle of the night, head down to the water, go out into the ocean. They're going to be out in the ocean for quite a while, several years. When they're teenagers, they usually will come back here to feed. So they're going to spend quite a bit of time out in the open ocean before they come back. So some things that we can do to actually help protect the sea turtles: turning your lights off in your hotels or condos and that sort of thing during the nesting season is important. If you're out for a walk at nighttime and you see a sea turtle laying their eggs, just kind of be frozen in place. So turn your lights off, get a flashlight, and just quietly watch. It's a pretty amazing experience to see them lay the eggs. But if they get disturbed, they'll get up, feel like they're vulnerable, they'll turn around and go back to the ocean without laying their eggs. And that's not good. So we want to give them an opportunity to lay their eggs in peace. So if you do see one, just let it be. Just keep your distance and watch and learn something. So when this nest is ready to hatch, what will happen about 24 to 48 hours before is where the nest is, actually where the egg chamber is, will start to cave in a little bit. And that's because the babies are digging upwards and the sand is starting to percolate downward through those empty shells. And so it'll start to cave in a little bit. You'll also see some crabs will start digging around there because they actually can hear the babies digging and they think they might get a free meal out of it yet. Ghost crabs that live out here will actually eat baby sea turtles. So they'll start digging in hopes that they can find a sea turtle for lunch or dinner or whatever. So anyway, but when you see them starting to cave in a little bit, the nest starting to cave in, that means within 24 to 48 hours the babies are going to emerge. Typically around here we have sea turtle watchers that are coordinated by the state park system. The rangers coordinate folks to come out here and watch these nests. When the babies come out, they can kind of keep an eye on them and hopefully guide them down to the beach if they can. If they start to go the wrong direction, we can kind of persuade them to go the right direction and hopefully prevent predators from attacking them while they're making their way down. But most of the sea turtle species are endangered, so anything we can do to help them is appreciated. But if you do see baby sea turtles moving down the beach, don't pick them up. All right, that's against the law. Only people who have license and are certified to work with sea turtles are allowed to pick them up. But it's a pretty amazing experience for them. So that's why I wanted to bring you down here. If you ever see nests marked off like this, you don't want to go inside that marked off area, you can get fined. It's a federal offense under the Endangered Species Act. So I don't know what the fine is, but you don't want to find out. So anyway, we're going to walk back down the beach and go back down where we were before, and we're going to get our seine net out, get in the water and get some fish, and you guys can get your dip nets and see what you can catch. And be looking down the beach for some shells and whatever other kinds of things you can come across. Okay, so let's go on back to where we were.
Whoa, look at his eyes. Oh, he's so cute. It's tiny. Oh.
Look at how fast he's walking. Oh, I don't think he likes the water.
I think he found something to eat. Well, it's pretty fast.
Look, those are things we were catching.
Yeah.
Wow, they're disappearing fast.
All right, so we're back where we were, and now I need to get a couple of volunteers to pull the seine net, and we'll go ahead and get started with that. If you're not up for the task of the seine net, then grab a dip net and see what you can catch. There's also a shovel and a little sifting tray, so if you want to dig through the sand and see what kinds of creatures you might be able to dig up in the sand, you can get a couple people working on that. If none of that appeals to you, you can just walk along the strand line and see what kinds of shells you can find on the beach. So all of these are important, and we've got a bucket here for you to put organisms in. We're going to fill that bucket up maybe a third of the way or so, and you can quarter of the way, and that would be good, and start putting organisms in it. It's really hot today, so we do need to change out that water every few minutes so that they don't get too hot. Okay, so let's go ahead and do some collecting.
Is that a girl or boy?
I think it's a girl.
It is a pretty crab.
Hang on. Up off the gravel? Well, I mean, we're dragging it in the sand. Well, isn't that what you're supposed to do? So they don't go under the net that much, so you can't get too. Hold it. Watch out, don't pull it that way. Hold it. You gotta wait on that. Hold. Don't pull. Wait, John, wait. Come on, bull.
Somebody get a bucket. Somebody get a bucket.
They're so graceful.
They look like they're waving.
Oh, really? Yeah. Wow, they are such a cool looking creature.
Hey, what are you doing?
I'm just looking for shells.
Try to find something that's intact.
That one's really pretty.
There's a lot of them in one little area right there. A lot of them seem to be broken though. Oh, that one's not. That one's really nice.
Oh, yeah. I like that one.
Oh wow, look at all those.
Oh, yeah, here's a couple more. Oh yeah, I like this one. Oh yeah, look at this one.
Is there a conch?
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's a
This
shark.
is it's a shark.
Oh, wow. I wonder what happened.
A lot of times people are fishing in the surf, they catch them and they just throw them up on the beach and let them die.
Oh, is that right? It's a small shark.
This
Is that a
guy,
baby shark?
they don't really get that big. This one's not full size, but it's called a sharp nose shark.
Oh yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
There.
It looks like a flea. Ginormous flea.
Don't they call those sand fleas?
Does it bite? But does it bite? They don't. Okay. Whoa, that's a big bird. What kind is it?
It's a great blue heron, but he's an immature one. His feathers have not changed colors yet. They look kind of drab when they're this age, but they look pretty when they get to be adults. Check it out. It's a Portuguese man-o-war. Don't touch it though. It can sting you even when it's dead. Wow, you guys did a great job with the small seine net. That's a lot of fish. Just take a few of each species and throw the rest back. We don't need a million of each one in our bucket. Be sure and change the water out in that bucket before it gets too hot, okay? Looks like you guys got some interesting fish. Come back! All right, gather around everybody. It's time to identify some of the organisms we've been collecting. So if you have buckets with critters in them, please bring these over here, please. And you're going to need your species checklist. All right, so go ahead and get those out and make sure you got something to write with. And we're going to go through some of the organisms and identify them and see what you got. So, we've already gone over the plants, so I'm just going to run through them really quickly. Make sure you have those checked off on your list. And then we will move on to the other organisms in the buckets. Okay? So under plants, plants you should have checked off are the American sea rocket, and that was on the foredune area. Beach rosemary, which was on the backside of the primary dune. Dollarweed, which was in the foredune. Fiddle-leaf morning glory, which was on the front side of the primary dune. Greenbrier, which was back in the secondary dune. Prickly pear cactus, which was on the back side of the primary dune. And sand live oak, which was on the back side of the primary dune. And sea oats, which was on the front side of the primary dune. We had camphor weed, which is not on your sheet. You would have had to add that. That's Heterotheca subaxilis, camphor weed. And that's one that we saw back in the secondary dunes. And black-eyed Susan, which is one that was planted there right kind of at the edge of the swale. And that one is Rudbeckia furta. That was not on your sheet either. Okay, so that's pretty much the plants. Let's talk about algae for just a minute. So you guys did find one species of algae today, and that was sea lettuce, Ulva latuca. And it's in the bucket right here, so let me get that out. So this is Ulva. Ulva is sea lettuce, and this is really pretty green algae. It's a very bright green. A lot of green algae live in fresh water rather than salt water, but this is one of the few species that does live in salt water. And we're going to actually be doing an experiment later this semester using sea lettuce. So that's good that you guys found one today so you see what it looks like. Okay, so that's the only algae that we had today. There's another algae we do see out here sometimes, and that is gulfweed or sargassum, which washes up on our beaches this time of year sometimes, but we did not have any today. So, all right, so that brings us to clams and snails. Let's talk a little bit about those. Let's see what we've got in the bucket here. All right, so this is a handful of coquina clams. Coquinas are one of the organisms that y'all saw that were burrowing in the intertidal area. So these are really interesting little clams. They're very beautiful. They come in every color of the rainbow. And They're excellent diggers, and they're also the only clams that know how to surf. Right. Yeah, they actually will sense the incoming vibrations of a wave, and when they feel the wave coming, they will launch themselves up into the water column and basically surf up the beach. And when they land then, after the tide starts to go back out, or the wave starts to recede, then they will start to burrow immediately back down into the sand. So they're constantly doing this, sort of getting dislodging themselves and then burrowing back into the sand. So as far as I know, they're the only species of clams that surf. So that's kind of interesting. So that's a Coquina donax variabilis. It's on your sheet somewhere. So the next one I want to talk about is the Florida fighting conch. Let me let this go here. All right. All right, so this is just the shell, but this is the Florida fighting conch. It's Strombus alatus, and these guys are fairly common around this area. The true conchs, the Florida queen conch, used to be here many years ago, but they were wiped out. In fact, they're very hard to find in Florida anymore, even though they at one time were our state shell. But these guys, this is a smaller related species. It is a true conch, but it's called the Florida fighting conch. And this is a carnivorous snail, so they go after a variety of different food sources that they can eat. So sometimes they eat other snails, sometimes they go after clams, maybe a dead fish, small organisms that they can go after. So that's the Florida fighting conch. And of course, this is just the shell. The animal is already dead. So here's another one, just the shell here. This is the giant Atlantic cockle shell, Dinocardium robustum. This is one of the largest species of clams that lives out here on the barrier islands in the intertidal and subtidal zones. And it's a really beautiful shell. A lot of people, tourists and things, like to collect these things. But this is a filter feeder, so they live burrowed in the sand down, several centimeters below the sand surface, submerged, and they're constantly filtering plankton out of the water. So this is the giant Atlantic cockle shell. Okay. So this beautiful little guy is called the lettered olive. The lettered olive is a very smooth, shiny, glossy shell, you can see, and it has what looks like writing on the surface of it. Looks like somebody scribbled some illegible writing there, and that's why it's sometimes called the lettered olive. It belongs to a family of shells called olive shells. And this guy spends a lot of its time buried underneath the sand. Lettered olives are sneak attack species. They're carnivorous, and they burrow around underneath the sand, and every once in a while they pop up and grab something and then pull it back underneath the sand. So lettered olives, very common out here along the barrier island and a favorite of many shell collectors. That's Oliva cyanea, the lettered olive. It should be on your sheet. Oh, this is a little tiny guy here. All right, so this little tiny shell, this is called the cat's paw. It's not on your sheet. It's Plicatella gibbosa. And this guy is one half of a clamshell. The other half is missing here. But they're found out here. They're not super common, but we do see them from time to time. And they're really a unique little shell. They don't look like anything else. But they've got these interesting shape to the shell that makes it look like a cat's paw. All right, so this beautiful little shell is called a calico scallop. You may remember at the seagrass meadow that we saw the bay scallop, which was kind of gray and white shell. This guy's got this really beautiful multicolored shell that looks a little bit like calico, the fabric. So it's called the calico scallop. Should be on your sheet there. If it's not, you may have to write it in. So, but it's Argopecten gibbus, Argopecten gibbus, Gibbus. Is it on the sheet? Let me see. It is not on your sheet, so you have to write it in. Calico scallop, Argopecten gibbus. Okay? Like the bay scallop that we saw over at the Shoreline Park and the seagrass meadow, these guys are filter feeders, but they're found not in the estuary, but offshore in the Gulf, where they're filtering plankton. And they can just lay on the surface of the sediment, basically on the continental shelf, and filter the water. And then when they die, they get washed up here on the beaches from time to time. So this is also a favorite of shell collectors, so it's not surprising that you guys picked some of these up. So, all right, so this is actually the most common clam shell out here at Perdido Key, and it's called the cross-barred Chione, and I'm certain it's on your sheet. It's Chione cancellata. Chione cancellata. It's called the cross-barred Chione. Chione is a family of shells, a group of shells, clam shells. But these guys, they have lines that go at sort of right angles to each other. So that's why it's called cross-barred. So there's it looks almost like graph paper on the side of the shell. These little ridges where you've got two sets of lines at right angles to each other. But they're filter feeders, and so they burrow in the intertidal zone out here and filter the water when they're submerged. They have little, like most of the clams, they have little tubes, like little snorkel tubes that they use called siphons, where they suck water in one and out the other one. And so they can stay buried under the sediment and still get clean water to filter. And they're feeding on the plankton that's found in the surrounding water column. Okay, so there's one more, I think. Yeah, this is a beautiful shell. This is called the American auger, Terebra protexa. It's Terebra protexa. Terebra protexa, and it's actually not on your sheet, so you'll have to add it. We do have a related species on the sheet called the gray auger. It's the same genus, Terebra, but this is a different species. This is species protexa. Okay, so that's the American auger. The gray augers are much more common out here, but this one is kind of a chocolate brown color, and it's really beautiful, so I'm not surprised somebody put this in our bucket. All right, so that's the clams and snails. I think, yep, that's all the clams and snails that we have in the bucket. All right, next we need to talk about arthropods or shellfish. So one of the organisms that I had pointed out to you earlier today was the ghost crab. If you remember, we saw it on our way back from going to visit the turtle nest. So we didn't collect one of those, but ghost crabs are very common out here on the dunes. They belong to the species Oxypode quadrata. Oxypode quadrata. And ghost crabs get their name because they're very light colored, almost white with some yellow highlights. And these organisms are very common on the beach, but typically at night is when you see them. They live in burrows, usually in the foredune area, and they come down onto the beach during the nighttime. So if you're out here at night and you see these little white things darting around the beach, you can see why they might be called ghost crabs. The interesting thing about these is that their larval stages are completely aquatic. They're in the plankton, and then when they get bigger, they come up on shore and become a terrestrial organism. But they still have gills, and so they have to go down to the water and dip themselves in the water periodically in order to keep their gills moist so that they can breathe. Because they're not breathing with lungs, they're breathing with gills, moist gills on land. Kind of interesting. Another organism we need to talk about is, where's that bucket? Bring that bucket to me, okay? All right, thank you. So this is the, I gotta be careful picking this guy up. This is a speckled crab. They're actually relative of the blue crab, so they can definitely pinch you, and this is a reasonably good sized one, so anyway. Come here. Nope, 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 no pinching. Okay. Now, let me hold this up so you can see it. This is called a speckled crab, Araneus cribarius. And these guys are very common out here, but more common at night, like oxypodi, the ghost crab. These guys live in the surf zone, and a lot of people will come out here and collect them at nighttime, cook them up and eat them. They're an edible species, just like the blue crab is. But they fish for them with a flashlight, usually, and a dip net. So you walk along the shoreline, you shine the light in the water, and when you see the reflection of their eyes in the water, you reach down with your dip net and scoop them up. So anyway, that's the speckled crab, and I'm going to put this guy back in the bucket before I pinch you for my... what else do we have here? Where did this green bucket come from? Oh, you just found it on the beach. Okay, I'm thinking, we didn't bring a green bucket. All right, let's have the green bucket. All right, so this guy, a lot of people around here call these sand fleas, but their official name, they're referred to as a mole crab. It's Emerita talpoidea. And these guys are crabs, and they burrow sort of hind end first into the sand. And they live in the intertidal zone along with the coquina clams. And so usually you find these by sifting through the sand a little bit in the intertidal zone. Why do people want these things? That they actually are valued by people who fish from the shoreline in the Gulf here to use as bait. So they get these and fish for bait, and you can catch things with them. So anyway, that's the mole crab, Emerita talpoidea. You can go back in there. All right, we got one more thing I need to show you here. So we've seen hermit crabs before at some of the other field trips. We saw some at the seagrass meadow. So, but that was a different species. I think the one we saw there was the flat-clawed hermit crab. So this is actually a related species. It's called the striped hermit crab. It's Clibonarius vittatus. But just like other hermit crabs, they actually are living in the shells of abandoned snails, and they change out their shell periodically. And this guy is a scavenger. They eat whatever they can find, and so you'll find hundreds and hundreds of these things out here in the intertidal zone. Somebody got this with their dip net. So, all right, so that's striped hermit crab, Clibonarius vittatus. Okay, so I think, yeah, that's it for the arthropods. Let me talk briefly about the other invertebrates. In that category, some of you did see a Portuguese man-o-war that was on the beach back there a little bit. Portuguese man-o-war is Physalia physalis, and these live out in the open ocean in the Gulf. It's actually not one organism, but it's a colony of organisms. Each tentacle is a separate organism, and the float is also a separate organism. But they've got this purple color, which is kind of natural sunscreen for them out there in the open ocean. And they just float on the surface with their tentacles dangling down, and they catch fish. All right, they sting them with their stingers, and then they eat them and digest them, and share the food between all members of the colony. Only certain tentacles sting, only certain tentacles eat, certain tentacles reproduce, so it's an interesting sort of colonial existence for this organism. When you see these, you need to stay away from them. I'm glad nobody put it in a bucket. These things have a very potent sting, and they can literally put you in the hospital in some cases if you get stung badly enough. So I'm glad nobody touched or picked that up or put it in the bucket. Another invertebrate we also saw dead on the beach was the sea nettle. This is another stinging organism. Sea nettles are a type of jellyfish that's common out here in the Gulf. The sea nettle is Chrysoura quincacera. I can never say that. Let me see the thing. What do we got here? Oh, yes. Next page. It's a Chrysoura quincacera. Chrysoura quincacera. A sea nettle. That's a difficult one to pronounce. Sea nettles are a stinging species of Cnidarian. They belong to the phylum Cnidaria. They eat fish, and they drift around out in the open ocean. They don't have much control over where they go. These guys only live less than a year or so. This is the time of year when they reproduce, and so they're in their adult form right now, and you'll see more and more of them this time of the year. And then as it gets further into the fall, they will have reproduced and they will die out. And then they exist as larval stages on rocks out in the Gulf. And then in the spring, they will become in their jellyfish stage again and start to grow up during the summer. Early stages eat plankton, later stages eat fish. And they definitely will sting you. If you get stung by one of these, you want to put a little vinegar on it or some meat tenderizer are good things that will help it stop stinging and sort of break down the tissue that does the stinging. So that's the sea nettle. And we have one thing that's in the bucket that I think most everybody has seen one of these before. This is a sand dollar, of course. There are a number of species of sand dollars in the Gulf, but this is called the five-holed or five-slotted sand dollar, and its scientific name is Melita quinquis perforata, all right, which literally means having five perforations. All right. Quinquis perforata. These guys, what you're looking at is the skeleton of it. It's dead. When they're alive, they have lots of little tiny spines on them. Instead of being white, they're going to be kind of a light brownish color. And they are alive. They are a living organism. They belong to the phylum Echinodermata. Echinoderms have spiny skin and a hard exoskeleton around them. So these guys live actually in between the sandbars. If you know offshore here, in the subtidal area, you'll see usually a couple of sandbars during the summer months and into the fall. And the first sandbar that you get to from the shoreline, just beyond that is where you'll find these. It's kind of in between the first and second sandbar. And it's you'll find, if you go snorkeling out there and look around, you'll see thousands of them out there. So they're very, very common. Now there's a bigger sand dollar you'll see at some of the gift shops around here for sale, the skeletons of them, and that is a different species. That's the arrowhead sand dollar, and they live further out onto the continental shelf. But these small guys here are found inshore in between the two sandbars in the subtidal zone just off the ocean beach where we are right now. Okay, so that's the 5-slotted or 5-hulled sand dollar. Okay, I think that's it for the other invertebrates category. Can somebody bring me the bucket of fish? Okay, great. All right, so we've got the bucket of fish. First, before we even go with the fish, I want to say that you guys did a fabulous job today with the seine nets. We brought 2 with us today, the big one and the small one, and you all did a great job. It was much better than last week, so we are learning, and you guys caught quite a few fish, so and did a great job working together as a team. And it's much harder pulling the seine net in the surf than it is in the quiet waters in the bay. So excellent job, everybody. So good job. All right, so let's talk about fish. So there's a couple of fish that we saw, but we did not collect. So let's talk about those first. The first one was we saw a school of cow-nosed rays. Cow-nosed rays belong to the species Rhinoptera bonensis. All right, and the cow-nosed rays are a fascinating species. So most rays actually kind of spend time near the bottom, but this is a type of ray that swims near the surface. They're filter feeders. A lot of people think that they're baby manta rays, and they're kind of distant relatives of the manta ray, but not really closely related. But they have a similar feeding strategy in that they're filtering the water at the surface rather than being at the bottom, feeding off of invertebrates that they dig out of the bottom. So cow-nosed rays typically are a very social species. They school in pretty large schools, anywhere from 20 to several hundred, swimming together as a group. And a little bit later in the fall, usually in October, is mating season for these guys. And so the females actually, they use a sexual selection. They choose the male that has the most acrobatic jumps. And the males will jump out of the water and do flips. All right, and the female will pick the male that she thinks does the best flips. I've sat and watched these things, right around dusk in October before. It's just amazing. So anyway, that's the cow-nosed ray, very cool species. The other one that we saw was dead and washed up on the beach, and that was the Atlantic sharp-nosed shark. The Atlantic sharp-nose. That's Rhizoprionodon terranova. All right, the Atlantic sharp-nosed shark. So this is a small species of shark. They don't get any larger than about 4 feet or so. They typically are not a shark that bothers people. Mostly they eat smaller fish. A lot of people who are fishing in the surf do catch these things, and nobody eats them or anything, so they usually just throw them out or throw them up on the beach, usually. So this is not one we need to worry about attacking us when we're in the water. They're not a man-eating shark or anything like that. But that's the Atlantic sharp-nosed shark, and they're pretty common here in the northern Gulf. Okay, so that's it for the 2 species we saw but did not collect. Let's see what we have in our bucket. Come here. Gotcha. Okay, so this little guy is one that's very common here in the Gulf, and they tend to follow around jellyfish. All right, it's called the Atlantic bumperfish. It's Chloroscombrus chrysurus, the Atlantic bumperfish. And so pretty much Portuguese man-o-war, sea nettles, any kind of jellyfish or jellyfish-like organism will have these little guys following them around. They're basically commensalistic symbiotic sort of species. They kind of like some of the remoras that hang out with sharks. So these guys kind of hang out with the stinging species of jellyfish, and they're protected from predators because the predators can't get to them because of the jellyfish. And they also can sometimes get food scraps that are lost by the jellyfish. So it's a win-win deal for the fish. It doesn't really do that much for the species of jellyfish. So that's why I say it's more of a commensalistic relationship. Okay, so let's let this one go. All right. What else do we have? Okay, so this little guy is, I think, not on your sheet, but he's called the American half-beak. They look a little bit like needlefish, but the one jaw is actually longer than the other jaw, which is where they get the name half-beak. So they are shaped a little bit like a needlefish, but the jaw structure is very different on these. So the scientific name for this one is Hyperamphus meeki. That's the American half-beak. There's another species of half-beak that's more common in offshore waters, but this is the one we have in the northern Gulf over the continental shelf close to shore. So they just zip around in the water and eat whatever they can catch. So it's a little carnivorous fish. There you go. All right. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Okay, so this one is actually pretty familiar to you if you're doing saltwater fishing. A lot of people fish for these off of the beach. It's the Florida pompano, Trachinotus carolinus. This fish gets pretty good size. These are pretty small ones that you guys caught, but they get much bigger than this, and they are pretty good eating. And so a lot of people do like to fish for pompano when they're doing surf fishing off the beach. So that one we caught with our seine net, so good job on that. Some minnows in here. Little tiny guys. So we have two different kinds of minnows. So this one is called the scaled sardine, Herangula jaguana. The scaled sardine is related to the sardines that people eat that come in a can. Okay, this species is found here in the northern Gulf. It's one of several that are common in inshore waters. And sardines don't do well out of water, so I'm going to put this guy back here pretty quickly. But they're a plankton feeder. They feed in schools, and they eat mostly phytoplankton. So let me take that guy out. There's another minnow. All right, this guy is another species of minnow that we have, and it's called the Spanish sardine. So it's a related species. It's Sardinella aurita. Sardinella aurita, the Spanish sardine. And you can see it has the same general body shape, but its dimensions are a little bit different. And this guy's a little more elongated. The other one's a little sort of more wide, I guess, than long. This is more long than wide. But they're both schooling species of fish that eat phytoplankton. So, all right, what else do we have? Oh, a really big one. Okay. Oops. Okay. Let him calm down for a second. This is one that we see in a lot of coastal waters here along the Pensacola area. This is a mullet, all right, and it belongs to the genus Mugil. And so take a look at this. This is one of the fish that likes to jump out of the water. So they're mostly a bottom-feeding fish, but every so often they just jump out of the water, and nobody's quite sure why. But anyway, if you see a fish jumping out of the water in coastal waters around here, that's a pretty good chance it's the mullet. So anyway, they get a lot bigger than this, but this one's not tiny by any means. So I'm gonna let this guy go. Okay. Let's see what else we have in the bucket. Continue. All right. So this one is one called the Gulf Menhaden. Menhaden belonged to the scientific name Breviratoria petronus. And the menhaden are a fish that's fished for commercially, or at least they used to be. I'm not sure if they still do, but I believe they do. This is not a fish that people generally eat, but usually they're caught for production of cat food. It's one of the fish that goes in fish-flavored cat food. It's a fish that is fished commercially in the Gulf. They use giant purse seine nets to catch zillions of these things all at one time and bring them all up on board the ship. So they're a schooling species that eats phytoplankton, and pretty common in the Gulf. I'm not sure if they're not that tasty or why people don't eat them, but they do actually come into inshore waters and especially into our marshes sometimes, where they hang out for a while as juveniles. When they get bigger, then they go out into the Gulf of Mexico. All right, so that is the Gulf menhaden. I think that's all the fish that we have. That means we need to talk about reptiles. So we only saw evidence of one reptile here, and that was the loggerhead sea turtle nest that we visited. And I'm guessing that was a loggerhead, but we'll go ahead and mark it down. Loggerheads are caretta, and so we'll go ahead and mark that down since we did see a nest. And chances are in the high 90s that that's going to be a loggerhead nest there. There are some other reptiles that live out here, but we didn't see any of them today. There's some lizards and snakes and things, but we didn't see them. So now we need to talk about some of the birds that we saw today. So we saw the great blue heron. That's actually was an immature great blue heron we saw, but they belong to the species Ardea herodias. And the great blue heron is the largest bird in North America. So they belong to the crane family. And they're a wading bird that goes after fish in the intertidal area. And they're also pretty used to people around here, so they'll even try to look for fishermen to give them a handout once in a while. So. But that was an immature great blue heron. When they get a little bit older, their plumage is a lot more pretty. You see the blue color when they're adults. We saw a flock of brown pelicans flying over. So brown pelicans belong to the species Pelicanus occidentalis. And the brown pelican feeds in a way we call plunging. They basically fold their wings up and go diving straight down towards the water. They dive into the water, and as they dive in, they open up their mouth, and their lower throat area expands out tremendously. And they stretch it out there, and they can take like almost a gallon of water into their little pouch there in the lower jaw. And then when they come up to the surface, they squeeze that water out of there and just keep the fish. All right, and then they go ahead and swallow that. So it's a behavior called plunging. This is sort of diving into the water like that. Brown pelicans are very common around here today, but there was a time back in the 1970s when they almost went extinct. They were being heavily affected by a pesticide called DDT that was being used back in the 60s and 70s, and this actually interfered with their egg production, made their egg shells too thin. When the mother pelican would go to sit on her eggs, it would crush them. So they almost died out, but they were protected under the Endangered Species Act that was passed in 1972, and they have made a wonderful comeback all along the Gulf Coast now. Let's see, what other birds did we see? Lots of laughing gulls. That's Larus heterocilla. Laughing gulls are omnivores, and they'll go after and eat anything, and they even gang up on other birds and each other in order to get food. It's a strategy called piracy. So they just, they're pirates, like the PSD pirates. They go and get what they want, right? So that's the laughing gulls. They're named for their call, of course, which sounds like they're laughing, and we have encountered those on our last field trip, and probably will see them everywhere that we go along the Gulf Coast. What else? Willets. The willet is Catrophoros semipalmatus. It's a difficult one to say. Catoptrophoros semipalmatus. Their common name is willet, which is a lot easier to say, and they're called willets because their call sounds like their common name. When you listen to them call, they go willet, willet. All right, so their call sounds like their name. Willets are a shallow water wading bird. They go after small minnows, mole crabs, and whatever they can find in the intertidal zone. They have a little bit longer legs than some of the other shallow water wading birds, so they can wade, a couple feet offshore, maybe at the most, maybe a foot offshore, but they don't have to be right at the water's edge. They actually divide up their feeding strategy with another species, which is called the least sandpiper, and I know we saw some of those today also. Least sandpiper is Calidris minutilla. Their species name, minutilla, means really minute. And they're quite tiny and really small. So the least sandpiper and the willet both feed in the same habitat, basically, at the water's edge in the intertidal zone. But these guys have much shorter legs and shorter beaks, so they're more in the shallowest of the intertidal area, whereas the willets can be just a little further, maybe just another foot or so offshore. So they divide up that environment. The willet can feed in the same territory that the least sandpiper does, but a lot of times they won't, just to avoid having to compete with them. So they kind of divide up the intertidal area there into really shallow intertidal and a little bit less shallow intertidal. I think that's all the birds that we saw today. We didn't see any terns. Okay, that's fine. So, and that leaves us with our last category of mammals. Did anybody see any bottlenose dolphins today? No? Okay, we do see them out here sometimes, but typically more in the early morning or later in the afternoon, so we're kind of in between today. We didn't see any mammals directly, but we did see evidence of a mammal. We saw a hole and footprints of the Perdido Key beach mouse. So remember, the beach mouse is the Paromysis polionotus subspecies Tricelepsis. That's the Perdido Key beach mouse. Under mammals on your sheet, it just says beach mouse. So you can add the Perdido part. Okay, that's it as far as I know. Was there anything else we saw that we didn't identify, or did I miss something in one of the buckets? Okay. All right. Well, you folks did a great job today doing your sampling and collecting and worked together as a team. So caught quite a few fish and got to see some unique, unusual things that we don't necessarily always see every time we come out here. So I think it's been a good day. But it's time to get on back to the college. So we need to pack up our stuff. So please put everything back in our collecting bin and make sure you gather up all of our buckets and roll up our seine nets and make sure you rinse those off before you roll them up, and all of our dip nets and everything. So let's pick up all that stuff, and we're going to hike back to the firehouse area there in the parking lot and load everything up, and we'll head on back to the college. Okay?